With the expansion of the United States to the west, so too came the expansion of the railroads. Railroads were faster and more convenient than traveling by wagon and facilitated the easy expansion of the country. With transcontinental railroads, immigrants arriving on the East Coast could board a train in New York and make their way to the West Coast entirely by rail.
Here in Seattle, where I live, the arrival of the railroad, in this case the Great Northern Railway and the Northern Pacific, caused explosive growth. I'm standing on Alaskan Way, right on the Seattle waterfront. This is where trains used to arrive to the city from all across the country, carrying goods and passengers from all over the continent. With the Northern Pacific's arrival on Railroad Avenue and the Great Northern Railway's arrival in Everett in 1893, the population of Seattle rose from around 3,500 in 1880 to over 80,000 in 1900.
The transcontinental railroads fundamentally changed how people spread across the nation. Because of the nature of steam-powered trains, many towns started as Union Pacific depots and water stops. Cities like Las Vegas were founded with land next to the Union Pacific Railroad. Because of the railroads, people arriving from transatlantic ships ended up in faraway places like western Nebraska. Cities with many rail lines, along with water access to refill steam trains, like Chicago, became extremely important. Chicago became a major hub for switching freight between companies and connecting passengers from the east to the west. Car companies, such as General Motors, worked to portray road building as a public responsibility. This was to avoid highways facing the same fate as the streetcar networks, which were privately owned and not making money. This move to put the burden of road building on the public and government worked, as roads don't come anywhere near paying for themselves with vehicle-related taxes and require massive government spending with money pulled from other areas. Many of the first major roads, like the New Jersey Turnpike, were toll roads, but auto groups recognized that using public funds would allow for highway expansion at a much faster rate. Both railways and highways had profound impacts on the cities they went through. Highway planners included members of the auto industry. Even the CEO of GM was directly involved. But there were no urban planners, as the profession barely existed at the time. Highway engineers, who dominated the decision-making, were trained to design without much consideration for how a highway might impact the urban fabric of a city. This resulted in highways cutting through city centers with almost no regard for their impact on the surrounding area.
Like here in Seattle, where the freeway cuts directly through downtown.
Speaking of freeways, there is a perception that highways are somehow self-funding. People often assume that gas taxes and vehicle fees directly sustain road networks, but in reality, they have only ever paid for between 74 and 43% of costs. This means that money from people who don't use the roads, or money intended for other uses, is being used to build and maintain the grotesque and overbuilt road networks in the United States. Highways were also often used to get rid of blight, which was really just the places where black and poor people lived. Some planned highway segments were never constructed. Many of these were planned to go through areas inhabited by rich and influential people, who provided enough opposition to stop these roads from ever being built. In places without this influential opposition, entire neighborhoods were flattened to make way for massive highways. European cities have managed to stay rather dense, especially compared to the crazy sprawl seen in America. A common thing people attribute this to is the fact that urban centers in Europe are much older, with populations that didn't increase as fast. However, this is easily proven false. After World War II, when much of Europe was flattened, it didn't devolve into sprawl. In fact, the population density of metropolitan areas in the US is a mere quarter that of Germany. Even New York doesn't come close, with a third of the inhabitants per square mile compared to Frankfurt.
Cities need to be financially solvent. The big issue with single-family housing is that single-family homes do not produce enough money through taxes to maintain the infrastructure needed to support them. This results in infrastructure such as streets deteriorating and going unrepaired, like these potholes.
In a 2017 article exploring why cities have no money, Strong Towns found that Lafayette, Louisiana would need $32 billion to replace all of its infrastructure, an event that happens cumulatively about once in a generation. The issue with this is the fact that the entire tax base of Lafayette only comes out to around $16 billion. In order to cover infrastructure costs in a place like Lafayette, where the median household income is only $41,000 a year, the taxes on a home would have to go up from $1,500 all the way up to $9,200, meaning 1 out of every $5 the median family makes in Lafayette would have to go just to maintaining their infrastructure as it currently is. Revenues associated with the initial construction of new developments, like this one, provide the local government with money, and the pristine new infrastructure is handed off to them to maintain in the future. Strong Towns refers to this as the growth Ponzi scheme, and it is unfortunately the way much of America has been constructed since the 50s and 60s. Denser development would result in enough tax revenue to support the infrastructure around it. The way many American cities are constructed, the extra tax revenue generated by the small downtown area is nowhere near enough to offset the sprawl surrounding it.